Welcome to the SmartTechCheck Podcast, hosted by Mark Vena, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vena, host of the SmartTechCheck Podcast. Today's Thursday, January 13th, 2022. This is the first SmartTechCheck Podcast of 2022, and I want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. Today's podcast is completely focused on CES now that we've got that one under our belt. Lots to talk about that, so it's going to be a fun discussion. Joining me for today's podcast is Quain, who writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide. Stewart, who scribes for Twice, U.S. News, and Investopedia. And we may get a pop-in from RobPegoraro. We don't know where he is, but he was supposed to call in. Rob writes for, that's the kind of podcast we have. You can just call him when you want. He writes frequently for Tech Policy and Wirecutter, PC Magazine, and USA Today. But to the two stalwart journalists that I know so well, welcome to the podcast today, guys. How are you?
Hey, good to see you.
Happy New Year.
Now, Rob and I did go to CES. You know, we were the ones who put on hazmat suits, and we braved that whole thing. You two guys didn't go, and we're going to get into some topics and to kind of walk through some of the things that were interesting there. But before we get into the topics, for each of you, and I'll start with you, John. Why didn't you? I mean, you could have gone. And putting expense aside, it's CES is generally not an inexpensive trip to go on, especially if you've got to foot your own bill. What was the decision criteria in your mind of why, and did you miss anything? Did you think you lost anything by not attending?
I mean, the show was kind of imploding for me. I was booked to go. I had a place, and I had everything booked. I was ready to go, and I've only missed one in a number of years. So I'm not going to tell you how many years it has been, but I get one of those ribbons on my badge every year now. So I was booked to go, but you know what? The people that I wanted to meet were one by one dropping like flies, and that was the problem. So I had two last people, Gil Pratt, who's the CEO of Toyota's Technology Research Division, and he turned out not to be going when I found out I wasn't going. So that, and then the last one was Ben Lamb, who's the CEO of Colossal, the genetic they're the Jurassic Park company, as people think of them anyway. I was his last meeting standing, and he was my last meeting, and it basically we're like, no. So it couldn't be the networking event that we wanted it to be, and because of that was really, I pulled the plug at the last minute. I was disappointed.
Right. Stewart, same question for you.
Well, like John, this is the first live CES that I've missed since 1984. So I had a gigantic case of FOMO, and like John, I was completely booked, had a hotel, had the air, everything was booked. But I would say probably November, once the news of Omicron started to hit, I started to get second thoughts about it, because while CTA was obviously making all manner of precautions for the show floor, you can't account for what's going on in the hotels. Mm-hmm. Las Vegas and Nevada doesn't have the kind of strict vaccination rules that New York has. Right. And so that gave me some pause. The economics of it certainly gave me some pause, because in which it was combined with some certain physical issues that I'm having, as John is completely aware of, since we travel around quite a bit. I have back issues, and for me to be able to economically cover the show, I have to do a lot of work. And because I'm having some back problems, I was not going to be able to get around as much as I like. So I managed to save the expense, cover what I could from home, and suffered a gigantic case of FOMO.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it was an interesting show from the get-go, because like you said, John, I've never experienced anything where I'm literally on the at San Jose Airport at the Southwest gate, ready to get on my flight at 8 o'clock in the morning, and in real time, people are bowing out. Right. And I've never, experienced that before, in that, you always have cancellations at meetings, but generally not, hours before the event is going to begin. And, I was really concerned about, once I got to the airport, once I got to Las Vegas Airport, was it was it going to be crowded? Was it going to what kind of setup did they have? They actually did have it fairly well set up, and they gave everyone COVID test kits that you could take back. Now, interestingly enough, is that it was very much a self-policing type of thing, because they had a vaccine commitment that you had to be vaccinated and show a vaccine pass to get into the actual convention center and into the areas of the Venetian where a lot of the meetings take place. But you did not have to prove that you didn't have COVID, which seems to me kind of an you didn't have to show, hey, I took the test and here's the results of the test. So it's very much, you're on the honor system in terms of, hey, do you feel comfortable enough that you took the test and, you're okay to go on the show floor? And there's a lot of people that, were vaccinated, but did take that test, know that they have COVID, and they're not going to turn around and get back on a plane. I mean, they were going to probably still go to the show. So there was kind of a flaw in that system to a degree, but they did everything they possibly could. In terms of the casinos were all, protected with plexiglass and all the obvious stuff that you've read about. And what I will say, one story that was bizarre to me, and I posted something on LinkedIn about this. I think I got 3,000 or 4,000 views in like 20 minutes. Is that LG, decided to cancel a couple days before, and they have an enormous booth. I mean, they have a 10,000 square foot area like they typically do. And when they bailed out, they couldn't remove any of the material that they've already pre-installed. So they literally left a large plywood floor with QR codes where the product demos would be all over the place. And of course, that was subject to a bit of derision by just anybody who showed up at the show and decided to walk on the plywood floor and see that. But that was kind of bizarre.
I saw pictures of the LG booth. It looked like a post-apocalyptic, setup. It looked just so completely unfinished, but with jarring QR codes plastered everywhere.
Yeah, so that was bizarre. So I guess the question for you is that, even though the show, you guys didn't go, do you feel that you missed anything? I mean, everything was streamed and online. And I mean, did you feel that there was one bit of information that you overlooked because you didn't attend? John?
There wasn't one bit of misinformation that I missed. It was missing people. Because the thing about it, like we had talked about previously about remote working and going to the office, is that you miss meeting people. And when you miss meeting people, you miss that serendipitous
interaction
of information. It wasn't anything that I might have been looking for, and there was one thing I would have looked for, but it was just not seeing everybody and exchanging greetings and how's going on with you or what's new with your company that they may not have publicized. The one thing that I wanted to look for and I didn't hear anything about was the Matter smart home standard that is being pushed that we talked about about a month or so ago. And I would have been actively looking for Matter compatible products, but because I wasn't there, I couldn't look. And the virtual setup for visiting booths, it was not as good as I was hoped it was going to be. And I sort of gave up after about a half a dozen booths. So I don't know whether or not anybody was showing Matter compatible smart home gear.
Yeah, I could answer that. The Matter logo was everywhere. I mean, you could not. It was. Now, you really can't show Matter support. You could only put a logo there, and you make the claim that whether I have Alexa or whether I have Siri or whether I'm using Google Assistant, this device, Matter allows it to be interoperable across all three. A lot of so that was good to see that at least Matter got a very strong vote of endorsement by, I couldn't find a single vendor that did not have Matter support, but they were not showing Matter devices that are shipping in the marketplace yet. That's many.
That's interesting. Okay, that's good to know.
That's still many months away, and I think the jury is still out on whether there's going to be. Hey, listen, we've been to CES long enough that things that say they're going to happen at CES sometimes don't happen after CES is over. So,
No,
John,
I can't believe that. I can't believe that would happen.
Shocking. It's shocking.
Shocked that there's gambling going on here.
Yeah, right. Here are your winnings. So yes, no, the one thing for me, it's the people obviously in the events. I spend a lot of time, dinners and lunches and breakfasts and stuff like that with people that actually is much more productive often. But also for me, the mobility side. So all the autonomous vehicles, the electrification, there was a huge, which we'll talk about, but
Yep.
Push of EVs and e-mobility this show, unlike before. And that's all stuff that I actually ride in those vehicles. I actually go on test drives. I go to the racetrack. I, test some of these vehicles. In fact, there's a picture of me a couple of years ago on one of these two-wheeled things being shuttled around because I was avoiding the cab line. So I was in some, electric motorcycle. So that stuff, obviously, I can't do online. I can't. And so I can't actually see and experience whether these things work or not. So that was probably the most frustrating thing for me.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about that because, e-bikes and e-scooters and the entire mobility category was very well represented out here. The one topic I want to get, especially John, you're exactly the guy who can answer this question for me. I did attend the Sony press conference where the kid playing Spider-Man, Tom Holland, he made a guest appearance. I didn't know who he was until someone said, "Oh, by the way, he's the kid who's the new Spider-Man movie." But the CEO of Sony made, of course, big news, and then he announced that Sony has created a new division called the Sony Mobility Division. They have previously shown prototypes of of EV vehicles, and for the life of me, because I cover that category at a very high level, not in the depth that you look at that category, John. Answer me this question: why does Sony want to get into the autonomous car business? I just scratched my head saying, I don't get it, beyond the fact that everybody else in the technology space seems to want to dip their toes into that water. But explain to me, why do you think Sony wants to be in that space?
Well, because the head units, the same way that Panasonic and the Harmans and Samsung and those companies are now in it too, because these are the companies that supply the head units to all the automakers. So if they don't get in it, that business is going to disappear, because those head units are now all components of a fully autonomous vehicle, that it's fully integrated. I mean, we know this is an interesting case where we know exactly where this technology is going. There's no question about where it's going, right? It's all going to be electric. No, you're not going to have hydrogen cars. That's not a thing. They're going to be electric and they're going to be fully autonomous. How fast, that is a different matter, but that's where it's all going. And so the technology to enable all that needs to be integrated. And if they want to be in the business, unless they don't want to sell head units and just give up the whole category. So therefore they need to be.
So you don't think Sony really wants to get into you don't think Sony will ever build a car? That's really what I'm trying to get to.
I don't think Apple is not only do I not think it, Apple is never going to build a car, for example. That's not something that is in their capabilities. They could be a Tesla and start from scratch, but it's just not a thing. Right. Again, it's exactly the same reason. Look, if you want your technology to be deployed in these vehicles or part of it, you're going to have to play in the game somehow, and that's the obvious way to play in that game. The same way that Qualcomm, is pushing, because they realize, geez, our chips, we got to use our chips more places than just a smartphone. So
right.
That's the other reason. But you're right also about Sony. They've demonstrated this technology several years. In fact, they used the same word, the Sony Vision, I think, and it was like a compact SUV this time. But really, they're trying to bring together all their audio products and their infotainment systems and sell their movies and their games, and all of that in the car. So that's really what they want to be a part of. I don't think
John, can I ask you a question? I have a question about this, because this is what I was trying to figure out. So are we talking about the Sony and the Apple car efforts? Are we going to see like Apple cars made by GM or Sony Vision made by Ford? I mean, are they they're not going to go into the car manufacturing business. So are we going to see these electronic companies make deals with with car makers to actually physically make the vehicles? And will it be a Sony car made by Toyota or something?
Well, I mean, you might see Sony Vision in your vehicle, like you see Bowers and Wilkins and Macintosh and Meridian in vehicles, right?
Also, yeah. Mm-hmm.
As a premium system. But that model is interesting to talk about too, because look, Google's Waymo, which is the most advanced autonomous car system on the market, maybe Cruise. GM's Cruise is pretty close, but the whole point there was to sell this technology package to the OEMs, to the automakers, and then they would build, just as you're describing, their van, their minivan, and the Jaguar, and they're kind of halfway into those deals from Waymo, but it's proving to be really difficult to make that integration. It's not like Bose going in and saying, well, I sit there with a computer and I configure the interior sound system of the car and then here are your speakers. It's a lot more complicated than that, and I'm finding it difficult. Plus, there's the whole supply chain has completely thrown all the way U.S. automakers have done their business up in the air. And basically, a lot of them are rethinking it, saying, you know what, we should probably do this ourselves.
Right.
Because that seemed like an impossible thing before, but now the supply chain problems have shown them not doing it themselves has put them in terrifically bad position. So Tesla, for example, it's not such a bad position right now because they do their own stuff. So it's, which model is the one to use? I don't know. I mean, I think all those people are scratching their heads right now too.
Now, John, you brought up an interesting, invoked a interesting company named Qualcomm. I was at Qualcomm's press conference at the show last week, and Cristiano Amon, who's the CEO, is actually he's one of the more really thoughtful technology executives that I've seen in the space. Really give a really, really good, interesting pitch. And as you know, Qualcomm has a completely a fundamentally different approach to the autonomous driving experience than companies like NVIDIA. NVIDIA believes that you need to have a server, for lack of a better phrase. You need to have the horsepower, the smarts in your car to get the best non-latency experience to deal with all the randomness that autonomous driving, is always going to confront. Whereas Qualcomm's experience, because of their heritage in the wireless ASIC business, believes that, hey, if you've got really good 5G, and you've got really good wireless, you don't really have to burden the car with a lot of this extra infrastructure. Where's your head on that? I mean, do you think it's going to be a combination of the two, or do you think one view of the world will triumph over the other in that space?
I mean, there are two different functions. One is you cannot do it with 5G. I mean, that is a technology that doesn't do what they say it does. I feel like it's the inconceivable in Princess Bride, right? And I heard him say it again too. He said it again. He said, "Oh, this could be, the last mile connection." Not in the United States. In the most of the United States geographically is never going to get 5G. It's never going to happen because you need so many towers and they're so remote. So in Vermont, the way he sees it, that car would stop at the border of Massachusetts because there's no cellular connection. Once you go through Springfield, that's the last time you're going to see a cellular connection. And 5G is worse because it makes more towers. So people aren't going to put those towers in either. So obviously you need to have the sort of years ago would have been a supercomputer, but now is like, the size smaller than a laptop. Right. I think that is the way to go. You're going to need something on board that can handle all those situations. For extra safety, yes, having the connectivity. He didn't use the phrase, which because I tuned into his presentation too, but he never used cellular V2X or any of those phrases that we've been using for years, which is basically
yes, he did.
Did he? Because I didn't hear him.
Yeah. Yes, he did. He talked. I wrote the show daily story on it, having tuned into it. Yeah, he didn't mention them broadly, but he certainly addressed the issues when he was talking about the Snapdragon chassis concept.
Right, but he didn't. Did he use that acronym though?
Say again.
Use that acronym.
I don't think he used
Yeah.
I don't think he. I only call him using that acronym. Maybe I'm
did.
wrong.
I have the transcript. I can point out to you where he actually used them.
Okay, yeah.
But
'cause
again,
that used
it
to
wasn't
be-
a major point. The fact that you missed it indicates that he wasn't pushing it, but he
Right.
definitely did mention it.
But it's still a critical part of the Vita X's in the city, smart cities. So I do think that is going to be a thing. Yes, I think we'll need to do that if at all possible, it would certainly be helpful. Totally make cars safer and protect what we call vulnerable road users. That is pedestrians and cyclists who are not going to be part of that infrastructure, but somehow need to be surveilled by the rest of the thing. So, yeah, but I think the 5G pitch is just not working. I mean, people looking at those phones going, I don't know, it's fast enough right now. I watched my TikTok video, so I don't get it.
That's a massive comment to you, John. I know that you can't like TikTok videos latency free, which is not completely true. But Stewart, let me ask you a question. Are there any things that, since you probably watched most of CES online, was there anything that jumped at you from a trend standpoint that you thought was kind of interesting?
Well, even though John is absolutely correct about 5G, wireless connectivity, I think, is going to be huge. But the thing that I found the most interesting was space tech. I found that very intriguing. I did some reporting on Sierra Nevada, which is a company that displayed, you must have seen it in the Central Plaza. They had a ship called the Dream Chaser.
I did see that.
The whole idea behind Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, maybe not as much Virgin Galactic, but certainly Blue Origin and certainly SpaceX, is the commercialization of space and materials research and zero G and things of that nature. So all of these billionaires going up in space, ignore all of that. That's what these companies are saying. And Sierra Nevada is certainly one of those companies that are building commercial industrial space vehicles to conduct R&D and manufacturing in space, which is very pedestrian and pedantic, whatever you want to call it, but building and putting things, habitats in space to build stuff, to research stuff in a way that you can't do it on Earth. So I think the whole commercialization of space, which is starting off with these big name, it's the same thing that happened with Columbus and all those guys. You had the big name explorers finding it, and then what you have then follow that is sort of boring economic exploitation, which is what the Mayflower was and all of the other early colonies, except there are no indigenous people in space to commit genocide against. But essentially, I thought what was interesting is the eventual commercialization of space that's starting off with this star-studded kind of thing, but will eventually settle into factories and R&D labs in space.
What was the stock symbol for that company again, Stewart?
I do not know what the stock symbol is.
Sorry.
I don't even know if they're a public company.
Well, hey, listen, the topic I really want to get to, because we only have a few minutes left here, is the whole TV buying experience before the Super Bowl. That's become like a ritual. People, tend to run out to their retail stores. This was worse before the pandemic, and get that. It used to be like a 30 or 40 inch TV set in the day. Now it's, of course, 60, 70, 80, 90 inch TVs. Right. And by the way, the smart TV, larger format TVs, 8K TVs, they were certainly in force at CES. TCL had a very impressive booth with their new mini QLED technology. They showed a 90-inch display that was phenomenal type of thing. I actually did see some interesting companies out there. There was a company called Skyworth, which is a Chinese company that was showing. I actually put the video out on LinkedIn and YouTube. They have a 50 or it's either 50 or 55 inch. I actually saw it in their suite where it's a curved on demand type of display. I mean, literally, it looks like a flat panel, but it has a mechanical device that allows you to curve the screen for different types of entertainment functions, whether it be gaming or movies or things like that. Haven't seen that around. That was kind of an interesting. I think they'll actually get a lot of play with that capability. But let me start off with you, John. When you do get those calls, when you do get those emails from friends, readers of your column about, hey, I want to buy a TV, what are the things what's kind of advice that you give them right up front?
So I think I have 6 or 7 TVs right now that are
so you really got to ask
and do it for Tom's Guide and T3 and some others. But I mean, obviously it's the size of the sets have increased, and now a 65 inch is sort of the sweet spot, that unless you're in a Manhattan a small place, but in most houses that is the kind of sweet spot. And yes, it's a 4K TV, and yes, the sort of regular features that it should have. One of the things I look for is actually horizontal viewing angles. So if they can go into a store somewhere to look at that, to see what that looks like, that is walking back and forth in front of it. Because if you're lucky enough to have other people in your home at the moment, then sitting off angle makes a substantial difference in some of these sets. Prices have gone up. I mean, that's the biggest thing we've noticed, that prices have gone up in the last year, first time in 30 some odd years, and so they're not going to get the deals that they thought they would get. However, Stewart's also, as mentioned this before, we're talking, he before the Super Bowls, because come the very early spring, all the new sets come out. So they are trying to clear out
all the inventory.
Sets. Yeah, but before, and they all know, and we all know, that new one's coming out. In fact, I have to write a few reviews before that happens. But one thing, just so I can start off the disagreement with Stewart, is I actually like the 8K sets. So I have a TCL 8K set right now. And I thought when I started testing it, who needs that, blah, blah, blah. But actually, I really like it. And I was watching Apocalypse Now Redux on it. And I thought, and that's a movie that was filmed way before any of these resolutions were available. I really like it. I thought it was very good. I thought it's off-axis viewing. The detail is really good. You can sit closer to it. And it upscaled very, very well. So I actually thought,
which
that might be a thing.
Which set?
So, yeah.
John,
so
which set?
We'll hand it off to Stewart.
which 8K set, John?
It's the current TCL.
The TCL 8K. I know which one you're talking about.
What size?
But it weighs a ton. I have to tell you, it's like
it was the mini LED set.
It's got extra glass in it, and I almost killed myself getting up a set of stairs. But just
so Rob just snuck into the podcast. I don't know who let him in.
Hey, Rob.
Hey, I brought my co-pilot here. Don't talk too loud. He's asleep. Shh.
All right, we'll keep the
Be
podcast
very quiet.
Hey, let me ask Rob. Let me ask you a question. Can you overbuy when someone is, the prices have come down so dramatically? Is there a danger, especially if people live in apartments and they don't live in enormous houses with large family rooms? Can you overbuy and the experience being a less experience because that TV is just too large for a room? Is that something that someone should consider?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a TV. I'm going to get drummed out of the polite Consumer Electronics Society for saying that. It is just a screen on which you watch stuff. So it has to sort of fit in with everything else in the house. If you have to step around it, that's no good. If you want to spend more, I mean, I want to know what that 8K set JQ likes. What's the price premium on that compared to a 4K set? Would you pay that premium with your own money? I remain unsold on 8K because there's still nothing to watch, and nobody had a good answer for that at CES. I think, on the other hand, for most people, 65-inch screen is enormous. That's going to fill the room. It'll look so much better than what you had before. And the backdrop to all this is a product that wants to be more or less a commodity. And so the industry keeps trying something new, throws up something new against the wall to make it less of one. First it was 3D TV, then it was 4K TV, now it's 8K TV. But ultimately, I think most people, if they purchased a TV anytime recently, the picture quality is already pretty great and the marginal utility is not that much. You can give yourself a lot of time between upgrades in this area of the market.
So, Stewart, question for you. Roku versus Google Assistant versus Amazon's smart TV interface. Would you ever buy a TV without one of those solutions, or do you prefer one over the other?
My experience is primarily with Roku, which I adore. And when I've suggested TVs to people, I suggest to people that they get the Roku because I just think the interface is so good. The voice search is really good, and it's just really easy to use. But there are so many schemes. I mean, LG uses WebOS, which they seem to have perfected. The Amazon interface just skews so heavily to Amazon content that it's hard to compare it with the other ones. I'll admit to having no experience with Google TV, but they've all worked really, really hard at achieving the same things, which includes getting all the major streaming channels available, putting them on the remote control for one button access, voice control, to both search for content as well as control the TV, as well as to use it as a smart speaker kind of thing to ask it informational things like what's the weather or what's the Sierra Nevada stock symbol. So they're all, the best thing about this is that there are so many of them that it's a really good competition. And as we all know in technology, competition not only breeds innovation, but breeds, I don't know if excellence is the right word. They're all trying to top each other. So no matter which one you get, they're software upgradable, so they can, to a certain extent, keep up with the Joneses, but they will continue to get better because they're being pushed to get better. So all of them, I think, I wouldn't say don't get one without it, because even the simplest, like the Vizio SmartCast is not a big name, but they all try to do the same thing and provide the same degree of functionality. It's just a matter of, to a certain extent, personal preference. I don't know that I would base my TV buying based upon what the smart TV system is. For instance, 8K TV that John recommended from TCL, I'm not sure that that's a Roku or not. I think it is, but Roku also does Android TVs. So I think it's a secondary consideration, understanding that what you're looking for is the best TV, and that whatever the smart operating system that's going to be on it is going to provide what you really, the basis of what you're looking for.
Yeah, I want John, this question is for you, because I want to go back to something that Rob said that we work in an industry where we all get samples of TVs, many of which never go back because the manufacturers don't want these samples back, because once you have it, it's more of a hassle to send back. And the average consumer, when they're spending $1,500, $2,000 for a TV, you're not going to replace that. I wonder sometimes, are we in such an advantaged position of seeing all this new technology? We all get excited about it. Maybe not to the low level of enthusiasm that Rob has for 8K, because he just doesn't seem to think that it's getting any. And there's, by the way, a lot of evidence that supports that he's right about that. But do you really think that consumers, react to the changing technology in the smart TV space? That it could be a burden, making that decision to go out and spend $2,000 on a TV, because, hey, my family back in the day, when we had a TV in the living room, until that TV shorted out, it wasn't getting replaced.
Totally. I mean, yes, and that's certainly true that it's not something that you toss out. I mean, before the pandemic, people were actually starting to toss out those 65-inch sets because it was so inexpensive. You could buy a new one for $650. Well,
you'd have to work to spend $1,500 on a TV. These days.
So that's true. That's true.
But now the prices have changed. It depends what you want. I mean, the basics sort of are OLED is still the best technology, no question about it. Best picture. The other thing is the two leading smart TVs are actually Android TV and Roku. The WebOS is what LG does. It's pretty good, but it's not complete. And the Amazon one is just way too flaky and messy and Amazon oriented. So those are your three things. So if you want the best technology, you want an OLED set. And if you want, so the news from CES is that Samsung has its OLED sets and panels. So now you're going to see some real competition on that price points, and the quality is just going to get that much better. But look, the only thing that we all knew sucked from the beginning was 3D, because it looked terrible, right? It looked terrible. The
industry was all into it. CES,
right? They were into it, but 8K looks really good. I mean, 8K looks really freaking good. So if you're into movies and you're watching Boba Fett which I just did last night because they make us watch it every week and they won't let us watch it all at once. But anyway, those images are so sharp and so crystal clear that on these sets, if you like that, get what you can afford, because to your point, you're going to be stuck with it for a long time. So that's sort of my, you like buying a computer, you pay a little bit more than you actually wanted to pay so that you're not trying to replace it 2 years from now.
Yes. Real quick question before we end the podcast, Stewart, buying it online versus buying it in a real retail store, what would you in like 30 seconds, do you recommend people do that, or do you think they should go back to a traditional brick and mortar store?
Well, I think it depends upon what you're buying. If I'm buying an appliance, I would much rather buy that from a local retailer because I would want the service on it. But if I'm buying a TV, what goes wrong with TVs? And it's huge. How are you getting it to your house? Appliance, I don't know that I would buy an appliance online unless it was from a local retailer. If I was buying an appliance from, PC Richards here in New York or even Best Buy. As long as I know that I had a retailer to go back to with issues and they could provide a solution. But for most smaller items, the items that don't really require servicing after you buy them, the whole thing, there's two ways of doing it. You can buy online and pick up at the store if you want that local experience, or you could shop in the store and then buy it online just so you don't either have to schlep it or to just to get the best price. So I think it really depends upon the item that you're buying.
Rob, same question for you.
Yeah, for TV, I don't think there's a whole lot to be gained from looking at it in the store because the lighting, the whole context is not how you're going to see it in your living room. I would say the same thing. CES can sort of help in letting me know what the state of TV technology is, but it's more in terms of looking at things like the industrial design. The picture quality, really hard to say. It's a strange setup. My favorite CES displays would have last year's TV and this year's TV, where the TV manufacturer says, I'm sorry, what you sold me last year actually sucks. Here's this year's model instead. No one has two TVs side by side. You bring it home, plug it in, it looks awesome. You watch it for the next 5, 6, or 10 years. So there's a lot to be said for buying it online from the site of a retail chain that has actual physical outlets. So just in case you do have that fallback. But then it's also, check the pricing, who's got one better offer, rebate, or another. It's not, this is always good, this is always bad.
John, take us home. Your answer.
One thing I would tell you is, it's not just because I write the reviews and test them, but you should read the reviews because, to Rob's point, it is difficult to tell in a store, even when you go into a store, because they have them on the demo mode, which has this very bright picture, and you can't really tell, and you see lots of pixelation and shadows, and it doesn't look good. So it is difficult to tell in a store, and so definitely do your research. That's why a lot of my friends email me to what your point to ask me. And the other thing I would say is also the return, the problems I have had with televisions have all been, I take them out of the box, they look okay, I plug them in and the whole screen is shattered. That's what I've been finding, because as the panels got bigger, the actual shipping boxes they use are very expensive for like a 65-inch set. So I've seen a fair number of damaged sets, no fault of the manufacturer, but you should know, well, how do I get that back? And what is their policy? Because it's a pain in the neck to take a 65-inch set out of the box.
No,
you have to repack it.
I absolutely agree with you
all the time.
Most consumer electronics, and Stewart, it's kind of like what you just said, is that whether it's a PC or a laptop or a TV, if it's broken, if it doesn't work, you're going to know it the moment you get it out of you get it out of the box. And most retail, and to your point, John, is that the most excruciating experience of all time is when you take a very nice flat panel TV out of a large box and you decide for whatever reason to return it. Let's just say you just want to return it because the retailers have very generous return policies. That is an adventure, putting it back in the box. And most people, they throw the box out, they throw the material out. And it's been my experience that most of the retailers, the Best Buys of the world, they have very, very accommodating online return practices that they'll send something up to your house. They'll even sometimes bring a box with them if you somehow threw the box out for whatever reason. But anyway, it's going to be a big week for next couple of weeks is going to be big weeks for smart TV sales, and appreciate you joining me for today's podcast. So, guys, thanks again for joining me for today's podcast.
Go Cowboys.
Yeah, go Cowboys. Yeah. I'm not going to say go Giants. They'll be watching on they'll be all the Giants will be watching on big flat panel TV sets. For our viewing and listening audience, please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Mark Vena Tech Guy. And until next time, have a great weekend. It's a weekend. Have a great weekend. And hopefully RobPegoraro will be the new GM of the Giants in about 3 or 4
You don't want me in that job.
Thanks, guys. Take it easy.
Thanks.
Take care.